Something quite exciting happened recently. I was contacted by Isaac Cooke-khan with the offer to send me an advanced reader copy of his new book, The Fallout Family, the first book in the Wasteland Woes series. Of course, I said yes, and of course, I am going to talk about it. The Fallout Family is, as the title might suggest, a story set in a post-apocalyptic world. Being as it is the first installment, it leaves quite a few questions unanswered and a lot of room for the story to branch in various interesting directions going forward. This will, for the most part, be a spoiler-free review, with the exception of discussion around the character James and his prosthetic. Because, yes, one of the main characters in this book is disabled, and that fact is actually quite important to the narrative. But I'll start with the spoiler-free stuff, so you can decide for yourself if you want to stick around for the rest. First things first, The Fallout Family is a middle-grade book. It's meant for a younger audience, but as I like to point out on this channel, that doesn't mean something can't also be enjoyed by older people. And there are things I genuinely liked about this book. I found the titular Fallout family to be quite charming. The story itself does something I haven't really seen before in this kind of setting. I won't say exactly what, because we're in the spoiler-free section, but suffice it to say, this one's a bit of a genre blender. The pacing is decent, and the story has real stakes. Death isn't out of the question, which is a bold move to make in a book that's ostensibly for 8 to 12-year-old children. I respect that. I also spotted what I'm pretty sure were a Lotter and a Princess Bride reference, which honestly feels like I'm being bribed, but they gave me a sensible chuckle, so I'll allow it. The characterization is solid, even with such a short book in which to introduce a world, some of its rules, and a full cast of characters. It did well. I came out of it with a solid baseline understanding of who our main trio of Piper, James, and Bella are. However, and this is the bit where I start to feel bad because this guy reached out to ask me to read his book, I do have some hopefully constructive criticism. Being that this is a middle grade book, I understand the need to use simpler language for the sake of the children who are the target audience. That, in and of itself, is not the problem. The biggest issue I had while reading this book was the sometimes repetitive language, and the narration style at first. Also a little bit in the language itself, but I'll get to that. Starting with the repetitive language, one of the things I'm admittedly allergic to when I write is using the same word or sequence of words too close to each other, which means, of course, I spot it immediately if I see it in someone else's writing. This doesn't count for all words, obviously, but as an example, take this section. But it was the incoming chill of the night that the dog was worried about now. She needed a warm, safe place for the night. The night is used twice in very close proximity to itself, making it stand out jarringly, where a synonym or something else that drives home the point without repeating it might have served better. It's not the end of the world, and it might actually just be a me problem, because I'm so tuned into specifically this issue, but it's there, and this is my review, so I gotta talk about it. As for the inconsistency in narration style, this was most noticeable in the very first chapter, which is a rough place for a book to have a stumbling block. The first thing I noticed when I started reading is that I couldn't quickly pick out a point of view character. This naturally led me to think we're dealing with a third-person omniscient narrator. However, quite quickly after that, the narration seemed to focus in on one particular dog and her experience of the situation, and stayed with her just long enough that when it jumped to the human she was with and his rumination on the past, it was actually a little bit jarring. I do believe the narration is supposed to be third-person omniscient, but getting this point across was not at all helped by the fact that we do not get a single named character who appears on page until chapter 3. There's kind of a reason for this, but like I said, it didn't make figuring out which narration style I should calibrate my brain to any easier. And lastly, about the language itself. Like I said, it's simple because this book is meant to be read and understood by children. However, simple language doesn't mean it can't also be evocative. You don't have to state emotions outright all the time. You can be a little more descriptive. Things like describing how grief physically hurts or butterflies in your stomach. These are things kids will already have heard and can understand because they're human beings who will have experienced some of it themselves. Instead, stating that your characters are feeling lonely or sad and leaving it at that comes with the risk of feeling a bit hollow to the reader. While I did state earlier that the pacing is fine, there are some places in this book where I felt the narrative would have been served better if we'd had a little bit longer to linger in a situation, to let it really sink in and have a bigger emotional impact on the reader. So what I'm saying is essentially, I liked the story and the characters and what I've seen of the world so far, but the language felt a bit clunky at times, which is a hell of a hurdle for a book to run into, but hey. Honestly, if you're at all curious, I'd say go for it. Especially if you have a younger family member who you think would be interested in a post-apocalyptic story that blends genres in an unexpected way. Now, for the more spoilery part of the review, I mentioned James briefly already. He's a teenager surviving in the wasteland by scavenging to support himself and his little sister. He's also an amputee, and the book handles that very well. He has a below-the-knee prosthetic, which is obviously crucial for him to care for in the post-apocalyptic world that he lives in. I think he may have been born before whatever event happened that ruined the world, but he's definitely not old enough to remember what it was like. He's got his routine down, essentially. There's even a scene where he explicitly takes some time in the evening to do maintenance on his prosthetic. What I think is really interesting, though, is that the prosthetic both saves his life and kicks off the hardest part of the journey for him, his sister, and the dog they've adopted. Because, you see, he gets stabbed with a spear. It violently separates his leg from him, and the woman who stabbed him proceeds to chuck it as far away as she can, leaving him to make his slow, painful way back home without it, because she can throw real far for plot reasons. Genuinely, though. Eventually, this leads him to sending Bella, the dog, back home without him, when he realizes he won't be able to make it back before nightfall, and Bella and Piper, the sister, set out to rescue him. Of course, he's still determinedly making his way back, even though all he has to support himself with is a bamboo sword, and he's injured through more than just severely improper prosthetic detachment. James is the kind of disabled character where his disability is an obvious and undeniable part of who he is, while not serving as any kind of metaphor or commentary on him as a person. Not exactly surprising, considering the author has fibromyalgia, but nice to see regardless. He's protective, a skilled fighter, and even better at just plain surviving. You'll live longer if you can avoid fighting altogether, so even though he's put a lot of work into becoming stealthy enough to avoid confrontation when possible. While his disability is a very central part of the narrative, it's not portrayed as some kind of horrific tragedy. It's just a part of him. And I love that, especially in a book that's meant for children. The last quick thing I'll mention is this. As it currently stands, I'm a little weirded out by how the mutant humans are talked about in the book. They're not very present in the story, which is probably why there's so little clarity about them, but as it stands, they're viewed unilaterally as a threat despite some of them being nice. Apparently. So that could develop in a number of ways, some more positive than others. In conclusion, it's a decent book. There's a lot of potential here that could really bloom in further installments. If you think you can look past the language issues I brought up, I'd suggest giving it a read. Now, before I wrap things up, there is one more slightly awkward thing I have to mention. Since my review isn't entirely favorable, I'd feel pretty bad if I didn't link to the Grand Appeal charity, because 50p out of every digital and physical sale of the book is going to support the neurology and neurorehabilitation wards at the Bristol Royal Hospital for Children. So, because I'm not yelling from the rooftops for y'all to run and buy this book, I feel like I should at least link the charity if you still feel like giving those 50p that your book purchase would have netted them. That being said, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!